Hi, welcome everybody. Today we are excited to be having our guest, Amanda Wilson. She is a school psychologist and BCBA and also the founder of Navigating Behavior Change. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Nice to see you guys.
Yeah, we were just kind of catching up earlier. It's apparently Amanda's never been on our podcast, but we feel like we've known her forever. I think we met you guys way back and we met you in person. I think it was in
It was in Boston at
Boston.
ABAI.
It must have been
Mhm.
almost 3 years ago already.
Yeah.
And you guys, we kind of, we got along so well because we have very similar approaches and similar businesses. And it was amazing to have somebody to bounce ideas off of and just get to know somebody else in the space. So we're excited to learn more about you and what you do.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here today.
So for our audience, if you could start by introducing yourself and maybe a little bit of backgrounds about what you do and how you got there, the abridged version.
Sounds good. So I've been a school psychologist and a BCBA school psych for almost 20 years now, and a BCBA since 2014. And I'm a military wife. And my husband, Josh, is active duty Air Force. And because of that, I've actually lived and worked in a lot of different settings, which has given me a lot of unique experiences. So I started out in Clark County in Las Vegas, which is the fifth largest school district in the country, and had some really great experiences there. And that's where I was introduced to ABA and really got to where I was like, okay, I'm great at identifying kids with, what the disability category is. That's kind of that typical role and function of a school psych is special education evaluations, but I didn't know what to do intervention wise after that. And I didn't really like that. So that's when I actually changed positions and worked in a different department. We had a mentorship from Autism Partnership that was provided to us monthly. And that's when I became a BCBA and really fell in love with behavior. Following that, moved to Alaska, which is my home state, and worked there, which is a very, very diverse city and state. The school district there I worked in was very diverse and has some of the highest rates of trauma and emotional disturbance, mental health disorders, abuse and neglect, and so on and so forth, FASD. Trying to apply ABA to that population, totally different. And so that was a fun adventure, learning to work in that population. Currently, I'm in Ohio working in a very, very rural area, which is a totally different ballgame as well, looking at supports and needs that are required here and how we can incorporate and train those. So yeah, school psych, been in the field for a while, had some adventures in a behavior, and it's been interesting to work outside of the population of students with autism over the years and support all learners that have behavioral challenges.
You also run Navigating Behavior Change. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, so navigating behavior change, I started that with Danielle Lindquist, who has since moved on. And our goal really is to empower educators because working with kids with challenging behavior is overwhelming. Our teacher prep programs don't prepare us properly for that. And it's a big need. And so, what I do with navigating behavior change, a big part of that is workshops, training, consultation across the country so that we're empowering and teaching educators those skills, putting it in teacher speak in ways that are actionable so that they have the skill set to be able to work with those students confidently, decreasing their overwhelm, right? Making everybody happier.
You mentioned, it's not just autism, and I feel like autism is so prevalent now that, everybody seems to know about autism or know somebody who has autism and seem to know how to work a bit more with people with autism. But like you said, you work with, lots of people with different diagnoses. How does that change when you're dealing with challenging behavior, or is it the same? How do you teach others?
Um, it does change to an extent. Like it seems to be when you're working with students with autism, and you're applying those behavior analytic principles, it's pretty black and white. But when you're working with students who have, experienced trauma and have mental health disorders, it gets a little grayer. And sometimes those more, go-to interventions don't work very well or can cause more harm. And so it's really it's an adjustment of looking at like, well, how can we do more on the preventative side? How can we really focus on those replacement skills? And that's where it's kind of fun because it often goes beyond communication or some of those more basic skills. But at the same time, sometimes I feel like I am backing up and saying, yeah, let's work on learning to learn behaviors, because that's the skill. This isn't really a behavior challenge so much as they're missing skills that we need to teach. And so I just feel like it kind of is a little broader and less black and white, and that can be really exciting and fun to look at in a different way, right? Because you take a kid who is oppositional in their behaviors, right? And you're going to work differently with them, perhaps than you are with a kid who is, just struggling to communicate their wants and needs, right? So it's a different adventure, if you will, working with
What
this.
are some of those? You mentioned there's different preventative strategies. You may use more preventative strategies. What are some of those strategies, and how would it differ from, a kid with ASD or another kid, or maybe it wouldn't? What are some ideas?
I think there's a lot of overlap. And I think one way, just in my experiences across different districts, that we fail is that, we'll take students who have, more needs, and we'll put them in a self-contained classroom or in a separate school. And we think that because they have those higher needs, that we just need to focus on those individualized interventions. And sometimes we fail to implement the universals that do good things for all kids. And I think too, those universals, sometimes it's like, we know we should be doing them, but they're kind of like Bigfoot. You don't know what they really are. And so that has been my experience. A lot of times going in, for example, when I worked in Anchorage, my role was behavior analyst for 16 self-contained ED classrooms. And what I ended up writing into behavior plan after behavior plan after behavior plan were the universal supports that weren't in place. And those were the preventative strategies. How do we use pre-correction to set the stage for success? Are we teaching the expectations? Are we practicing them? How are we modifying the physical environment or the social environment to help them be more successful, to minimize that challenging routine? Those kind of things, right? Because we always go straight to teach them to, a break, to request that, work on coping skills, but we don't really do that good core universal stuff that helps everybody. And that's where it doesn't matter the eligibility category, right? Those universal supports are going to benefit everyone, right? I've been supporting preschool a lot in my current position. And the theme last year was, where's the visuals? They're preschoolers, right? Visuals aren't just for kids with autism. They're everywhere in our community. They're everywhere in our society. Where are the visuals in the preschool setting? We need the visuals, right? And so just targeting that as a universal support to benefit not only the kids I'm getting the referrals for, but all of the students. So those are some of the different things.
It's so true. I was in Manhattan a few weeks ago and we were taking the subway there, and the subway system is fantastic there. But when you get out at a strange stop, you're looking around and you're trying to find those visuals to say, okay, which exit do I go to? What street am I on? And then you pull out your phone to see where you're at. And those are all visuals that everybody uses.
They're really everywhere. I love to take pictures. Danielle and I would both do this. Expectations in the wild, routines in the wild, visuals in the wild, right? Like just where we find them. You see a lot of them at airports. We also, examples, non-examples, right? If they have the no stop don'ts in them, things like that. Just kind of a funny little thing I do.
We were talking earlier about how so much behavior change that needs to happen in a classroom is so contingent on the staff or the adults in that classroom changing their behavior first. And it's kind of like what you're referring to. Instead of focusing on changing the students' behavior, I think we as BCBAs and consultants coming into a school need to think about, well, so much more can be done if we help the staff in the classroom change their behavior, which are kind of a lot of those preventative strategies and how we talk to students and how we engage and how we structure things and reinforcement and visuals. Do you have any tips on how we can go in as consultants and BCBAs and kind of get staff on board for that?
something I talk about a lot is the parallel between the matching needs between students and adults, right? Students aren't the only ones with executive skill deficits. Adults have them too. Our deficits impact theirs, right? So drawing that parallel between that seems to help. We benefit from visuals just like they benefit from visuals. Job aids help us to do our job better, right? And breaking it down, always break it down, give the why. I think sometimes in my workshops or even just my day to day, people are like, yeah, we get it. But I'm like, I want you to understand the why, because when we can connect the why to the what and the how, we have better implementation of the what and the how. So a lot of it is drawing those parallels of the need, that it's not just them, but we benefit too. And then connecting that why, that rationale.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so true that we need to tap into everyone's reinforcers, including the staff, and like that's their why. And maybe it's as simple as, well, I just want my day to go smooth. I mean, that's not simple. But I also find that sometimes, like, schools, or some of the schools I'm, working with or familiar with, school is one thing, and ABA and behavior management are separate. Like, don't kind of mix the two. And I find that, having you been in the school system before you were a BCBA and now a BCBA, myself, I have a similar story, and I see the two as being so intertwined. But sometimes in the school, you come in and there's like these big gaps or big deficits between why does this matter to me? Or like, I'm not a BCBA, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. How can we get more people on board? Or like, what do you find are those major deficits between the two kind of combining?
I think I see that with it's school, it's ABA, and mental health. They're all divided, right? They're siloed instead of combined like they need to be. I feel like one of the big hiccups that I come across a lot is this idea that I don't want to use reinforcement, or reinforcement doesn't work, right? And that's again where I go back to those universal supports, because we can embed all those good things and have less need for a treasure box, right? And then I don't have to go into the explanation of like why the treasure box might be failing, right? Because, it's too delayed or they don't have the skills. But like, if we really focus on those more smaller actionable steps of some of those universal supports, we can get that same success or improvement for the students without having to use that. And that's another way I sometimes get that buy-in too, is that, okay, let's try some other options that don't involve put everything on that one, tangible reinforcer, but kind of how can we embed these things? Maybe, maybe the teacher isn't quite realizing we're embedding them, but how can we embed them so that they're not having to use something they feel is ineffective? And again, gets that better change up front than, that delayed waiting for the reinforcer. If that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, one of my other pet peeves that I hear a lot about reinforcement is like, they feel like it's the kid taking a step backwards. It's no, we're past this. Like, we shouldn't need this anymore, but they
Right.
do. I find that one of the tricks that sometimes works is using teacher language versus using ABA language. And so maybe I'm not even calling it, things like reinforcement and token systems and things like that, but it's about points or motivation, or, I feel like for some reason it like triggers this word in some people's head when I use data sheet language or contingencies or anything like that.
Right.
Trying to like, oh, you're right, it's not ABA. Like, let's just talk about your classroom, and we could talk about motivation and routines and things like that.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes, we're so quick to jump to the reinforcement and forget about the skills, right? That kid really might be motivated to get that treasure box and not have the skills to do so. So, backing it up there can help. What kind of like, I'm a big fan of the self and match system, because I love that, that self-monitoring and that self-reflection component. I feel like that's a really big skill, and I usually can get better buy-in when I go that route a lot of times. But, it's about, there's so many other factors, right? And that motivation, and yeah, that whole argument of like, they should just do it because they should be motivated to do it. But I mean, do you get gas for
How's
fun?
that working for you?
Right?
Sharon and I talk about can't do versus won't do a lot.
Mhm.
And yeah, maybe, they can be motivated as much as possible, but they just can't do it because they're
Yeah.
missing skills. Or maybe they have all the skills in the world, but they won't do it because they're not motivated. And you need
Right.
both in a classroom
You
situation.
do. You do. Absolutely.
If there was a teacher listening to this who, was running her own classroom and she's like, never really heard of universal supports, but she wanted to start and try one thing in her classroom that you think would make a really big difference. What would you recommend somebody start with? Like a quick win or something that could really work easily?
Pre-correction. One of my favorites, right? Simply, that every day you dread this time, this routine, right? Because Johnny or all the Johnnies struggle, right? So you can use pre-correction, single student or whole group or small group. Immediately prior to that, you pre-correct for the expected behavior. So it's fresh in their head. It's right there. On my website, there's a free download training on that, on pre-correction. It is literally my favorite one.
Give us an example, Amanda.
So if I know that transitioning in the hallway is a struggle after recess, right? The kids are kind of wound up, they're a little dysregulated. I want to create a stopgap before we cross that threshold into the building, and I'm going to pre-correct for the expected hallway behaviors. And it could be that I review it. It could be that I say, Sarah, tell me one of our expected hallway behaviors. That's it. Show me. Awesome. Love it. Johnny, show me another one, right? And we're just pre-correcting. We're reminding them fresh in their heads right before we need to use the behaviors, engage in them, what they are. So they're more likely to do it because they're not having to recall from their morning meeting, 4 hours ago, what the expected hallway behaviors are. We're doing it right now. And so it sets them up for better success and engaging in those expected behaviors.
I also love the way you're using school speak and not ABA speak, right? You're not saying we're priming.
I was going to say, I would call that
Right.
priming, but then I was
school
wrong.
speak.
And I don't know. And I've never worked in a clinical setting. So that's my, I've always been in the school setting. And yeah, putting in that teacher speak, it matters, right? So words, ways they can understand it, examples.
The teachers are going to go, oh, pre-correction, I know all about that. Or
Right.
pre-teaching, I know all about that. But I don't know what priming is. And priming is this really, odd term that just, people use.
Feels
like,
more clinical.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, pre-correction, literally get their attention, give the instruction. I mean, easy, right? And I feel like, I very rarely get pushback on something like that because it is so simple. And you don't have to use it all day, every day for everything. But if you know that that routine is difficult for one or more of your students, why not? Why not help them to be successful, right? You can fade it over time. The more they do it correctly, the more likely they'll be to do it correctly in the future, so let's pre-correct for it. Let's do it.
I think it's also a great strategy because you're kind of training the teacher to be proactive in thinking about the thing that's going to happen before it happens. And sometimes like when you're so overwhelmed and there's so many kids in your class and it's chaotic, you tend to react. And I think what we want to ultimately train people to do is be proactive. And this is a great way. And it's also a very, you see success right away. Like that transition right then is going to go smoother because you did something right before. So I think we're tapping into like, reinforcing the teacher for using the strategy and then also tapping into like, training that proactive muscle.
Exactly. Easy peasy. Successful, right?
You said you got some tips about this on your website. So we'll put a link to the Navigating Behavior Change website into our podcast so that anybody listening to this can grab that link really quickly.
I know if we were to flip and there's a BCBA listening to this and they're working with schools or with teachers, what would be a tip that they should take from this in their interactions with teachers? Is it the teacher language or what do you have as a best tip for that BCBA who's coming in with like their magic wand?
Look at, Shira's priming you. She's giving you prompts.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Right. I think a lot of it, yes, the teacher speak, right? You're going to turn them off so quickly. If you come in with that language they don't understand, you're not relatable automatically because of that. And it just creates that bigger divide between you and them that they don't understand what I deal with or what I have to do, right? Because not all BCBAs are experienced in the schools, right? So using that teacher speak, and sometimes if you're having to go in and do that consultation, right? I think about how you need to pair yourself, establish yourself as a reinforcer, right? So sometimes it's just listening, right? Sometimes it's just developing that relationship. Sometimes it's, hey, do you need to go get a drink of water? Like I've got them for 3 minutes, right? Just small little things to like establish yourself as like someone good that's going to be helpful.
I'm on your team.
So that they're not just pumping the brakes, right? I mean, I remember early in my career having a teacher who he didn't want to engage with anyone. It wasn't me personally, it was anyone in our department, but we'd literally schedule the time to meet, and I'd show up and the office would be like, he's on a field trip. And I'm like, are you serious? Right? But by the time that I moved and left that state, he hugged me goodbye. He was so thankful. We had engagement, right? So sometimes it's just getting through and establishing that and then being relatable with that teacher speak, breaking things down, and don't be afraid to model it. I think we tell too much. We tell
Yes,
them what to
agreed.
do. And this is my personal goal, even 20 years in. That's my goal with my day job this year, is to do a better job of modeling and coaching, not just telling what to do, but showing them. And, sometimes that means you're going to be like, yes, I can show you. I need to prep for that. I'm not going to do it right now, right? Because sometimes in the moment when you're called on that, it doesn't go so great. But, planning for it and doing it and following through with that makes a
And then
huge
also,
difference.
oops, it didn't work. Let me modify that and try
Yes.
something else,
That's
because
okay
that
too.
happens and that's okay.
I know one of our
Mhm.
biggest pet peeves is like the computer BCBA who like does everything from behind the screen, and I send you my notes and I'm telling you what to
Mhm.
do, but like is never really like, interacting with the students. And it's so valuable both to the
Mhm.
student, but also to the team that you're, supervising.
I also think about
Absolutely.
BCBAs now more than ever, how there's so much communication, too much communication, right? You've got WhatsApp, you've got Slack, you've got Voxer, you've got a whole
Mhm.
bunch of different ways of communicating, and you're constantly getting them bombarded. But as a result, you may be taking on more and more clients. And I know that, our code of ethics says we should, only take what's doable. But at the same time, sometimes certain weeks, certain months are, more heavily weighted than others. So sometimes
Mhm.
it's about, I've got to get into that school, check off the box, and get out of that school really quickly.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden you've got us talking about, well, you've got to develop a relationship with a teacher, and sometimes you just need to listen and what have you. And that gets really hard
It
because,
does.
you've got productivity and you've got compassion, and you need to have both. And sometimes you
Mhm.
just need to put compassion over productivity, and just
Mhm.
being in there and listening and not doing anything else in the school can actually be
Right.
more
Don't be
effective
helpful.
at
Don't be
checking off
useful.
that box,
Yeah.
right? And I had to
Right.
learn that. That was a huge skill
Yeah.
that I needed to overcome.
Right. Because we come in, we're confident, right? We're people who have like pursued this knowledge. And often, and I know I struggled with this early in my career where I'd come in and be like, no, you need to do what you need to do. Like, and this is it, right? Um, being too black and white as professionals, and like not being afraid to live in that gray and like work on that relationship and put aside that productivity for the long term, right? Right? So that can be a struggle. It can be hard to learn. I always feel like consultation is an art form, and it's like you're continually evolving, and like each school culture is different. There are buildings that I love to go into. There are buildings I dread to go into. And I think we can all relate to that, because the culture is different and the receptiveness is different. Um, but we can make progress, big or small, no matter what. Sometimes it just takes a lot longer than others, unfortunately.
And I think we as a field do still have a ways to go in the relationship building with not our clients. Like I think we're making progress with the relationship building with our clients, but then the whole, all the other professionals that we work with, and the teachers and the support staff and the
Mhm.
psychologists and the speech therapists, I think that that's still, an area that we can continue to think about the relationship, because they are the people that we're going to be relying on and working with and collaborating with. So that relationship is just as important.
It is. It is, especially I think with mental health. That's the one where I feel like there's the biggest gap and struggle.
Mhm.
A lot of times OTs, PT, speech, like it's easier, I think, because there's been that collaboration or that interaction longer, but mental health is kind of that newer where, you know, don't step on our toes. And it's like, well, we're not, but we need to work together. It's not
How do
separate.
I stay in my scope, but also collaborate, especially when it feels like all the mentalism and everything that comes up with that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could talk forever, but maybe we really appreciate you being here. You're just a wealth of knowledge. And everyone who hasn't yet checked out Navigating Behavior Change would definitely recommend that you do. You have such a great way of breaking down more complex ideas into very simple and understandable forms. You have like great, data. I don't know if it's a data sheet, but just like visuals and downloads and things that make behavioral terms and behavioral strategies so much easier. So people should definitely go check that out. We hope that we'll see you again in person soon, maybe at the next
Yes.
conference. You'll be there. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much.